everybody, and welcome. My name's David Carney. I'm the Executive Director of the Career Industry Council of Australia. Welcome to the third of our webinars in our AI and Career Development Month. We're halfway through the month. We're into the third webinar. We've had two outstanding webinars. I'm sure the third webinar is going to be just as entertaining and informative for us. And I'm going to introduce Rob to you in a moment. Before we get underway today, I would just like to make an acknowledgement of country. So the Career Industry Council of Australia would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land throughout Australia and their deep connection to land, sea and community. I'd like to acknowledge that we're hosting this webinar on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are participating in the webinar with us this morning. Just a tiny little bit of housekeeping. If you're a regular to our webinars, this will be familiar to you, but just to let you know, the session is being recorded. If you do have any issues, technical issues through the course of the next hour, we'd ask you just in the first instance to try refreshing your screen. If that doesn't work, you can log out and come back in with the link that you have been provided with. We'll have the chat function open today. I think Rob's going to ask you to participate in as part of the chat, so feel free, and we look forward to your contributions through the chat. We just remind you that if you are putting contributions into the chat, that you do click on the Everyone tab. That allows everybody to see your contribution. Because of the numbers that we've got in the session today, if you've got any specific questions for Rob at the end of his presentation, we would ask you please to put those into the Q&A button. It just allows us to facilitate those for Rob, and we can see those and we can try to get to those as quick as easy as possible for you. As I did say, we are expecting big numbers again today, so if we don't get to your question, we do apologise in advance. As I said, this is the third webinar. Our final webinar is next Wednesday with Danny from the UK. He's talking about how to use Gen AI tools as a career development professional. He's got some live demos and case studies. So if you're interested in the final webinar of the series and you haven't already registered, you can go to the Seeker website, click on the events tab and register there. So that's enough of the housekeeping from me. It gives me a great opportunity now to introduce Rob to you. Rob's been pursuing a passion for innovation in career development since 1986. He is a professor in the Career Development Professional Program at Conestoga College, where he's been leading the way in training career professionals through interactive online experiences. In addition to his teaching role, Rob has also been working with clients where he's been exploring the integration of AI into career development practices. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Rob. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you very much, David, and welcome everyone. It's great to have so many people here. And there we go. I've got my screen up. Okay, perfect.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. And it's lovely. I thought we'd only have folks from Australia and Southeast Asia, but there's a few Canadians on this. So it's like, all right, this is amazing. So welcome. I just want to do a bit of an introduction, get a quick overview of some of your experiences, then we'll do a brief overview of AI. I want to talk about ethical use issues because that doesn't get addressed enough in my personal opinion. And then the heart of what we're getting into is the use of how I work with story. And I've always done narrative or story-based career transition, employment transition work. So that's the heart of it. And there'll be time for questions. If you have questions along the way, you can put them in the chat. If they're directly related to what I'm addressing in the moment, I'll pick them up. But I'll definitely do my best to cover off as much as I can at the end. And so I'm really interested in hearing your experiences with artificial intelligence. Don't use it, totally afraid of it, have some experience. Are you a pro and we should sign you up to lead a seminar? So I'm really curious, just a little, throw into the chat line a little bit about what your experience is so we can just get a glance at where you are as a group. That would be helpful. I started getting into it at the college because we were looking at it starting from just the fear of plagiarism. And then I started playing with it and running prompt analysis with standard stuff I would do with clients. And we're getting a great range showing up right away. Folks who have used it a bit. We've got some new total beginners, frightened by the potential. Great. Okay. A little bit of experience, just experimenting, limited, want to get to know more. Okay. Just getting into it, dabbling into it. And that's great because I'd say that is the norm, is a lot of us have been kind of dabbling into it, going, okay, what is this? What can I do with it? And it's a bit overwhelming because it's so complicated. And there's so many systems out there. So yeah, this is great. New to it, would love to see its use in healthcare. Okay. Interesting. Using it for social media and resume writing work. Lovely. Okay. So got a lot of curiosity and open-mindedness. That's fantastic. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate folks sharing. And I'm I'm going to really assume that the majority of folks, where I'm coming at, I'm going to do some beginner stuff. And then I'm going to go into, even if you've been doing a lot of, and if you understand the words prompt engineering, that puts you at a, intermediate level right away. So I'm going to be showing you the types of prompts that I work with and how I use them. That's the heart of what we're getting into. Okay, but first I want to give a little bit of background in terms of what I've experienced with, just some interesting aspects. So understanding the Gartner hype cycle, a quick overview of branches of AI and range and types of AI tools, just to make sure I want to kind of narrow down and go, what is it we're actually talking about? Okay, and what we're not talking about as well. Okay. Okay. Oh, interesting. And so we've got dabblers new to it, trying it out for resume stuff. Okay, great. Thank you. So some of you may have heard of the Gartner Group. The Gartner Group is an information technology advice consultancy company, and they've been tracking IT issues across the internet for decades. At one point, I actually worked in corporate financial services inside the information technology division as a career coach and consultant. So I got to learn a lot about issues going on in IT. And one of the things that folks would track, is there's always new technology coming out, is this thing called the Gartner hype cycle, which is, and for those of you who are around when the internet came out, in the beginning, it was like, oh, this is amazing. Everyone gets really excited. This is the best thing in the world. And there's all sorts of companies come up around it. And everyone's thinking it's just incredible. And then you reach this peak, and then you go through this downward decline where everyone goes, oh, this is terrible. This isn't what we thought it would be. And then you find some middle ground, which they call the plateau of productivity. So every new technology goes through this weird cycle where people expect to do things, it can do things that it can't do, and they believe it's going to change everything, and then they realize, oh, it can't do this, it can't do that, right? So we have overly unrealistic positive expectations and overly unrealistic fears come out with all new technologies. AI's probably got that more than any other technology I've seen because of its potential. And there's a lot of good science fiction out there about what it could be. So there's lots of fears, but what's interesting is we're a little bit over the peak, and I think we're sloping into the trough of disillusionment shortly. So it's helpful, but it's a changing environment. So it's just helpful to realize that this is a cycle that all technologies go through, and it's very normal. And just to realize, oh, we're going to ride it out, and we aren't really going to know where things stand with AI for a year or so till there's some settling that needs to happen in terms of the type of AI that we're getting into here. And there's many branches of artificial intelligence. So there's machine learning, you've got speech management, there's expert rule systems, there's computer vision. We're actually going to get into just natural language processing. Okay, so we're not looking at all of AI. We're looking at a particular area, which natural language processing, out of which that's where generative AI. Okay, and when you think of open AI and ChatGPT, it's all over in that. So we're going to narrow our niche and just look at that in a second. But I also want to give a little bit of history about technology applications and specifically artificial intelligence applications so we can put it in a context. What makes a technology interesting is and helpful to humans is really captured on this chart. So the key thing here is that it doesn't matter any tool. A tool isn't useful if you can do the work yourself faster and more accurately. So what's the key thing is, at what point does a tool allow you to do a task faster than you could without the tool and better than you could without the tool, right? So it's the speed and it's the quality, right? So on this chart here, you'll see at the top, it goes from -100 to 0. 0 is what is set as a human performance benchmark. So that's where a human performs a particular task. And when any technology gets released, it's always set at -100. Then you're tracking, okay, how well does this thing work, right? So handwriting recognition took a long time to get to the point where it was as good as human, and it's really not that much better than what a human could do right now. Okay, speech recognition is actually pretty good now, but it took a long time to get there too. And then you'll notice image recognition, which started, 2008 about the technology for that. It was quicker for it to outpace what a human could do, and it's much better than what a human could do. Okay. Then you've got reading comprehension technology. And finally, what we're looking at today, natural languaging processing. So that's the purple on the right-hand side. It's only been around a short time, and it was a very quick climb to where natural language models could do things faster and at a higher quality than a human, right? And that's why generative artificial intelligence, which is working with words, right, has got so much impact, is the speed of which it's changed things and the quality of which it's changed our ability to do things. So that's important because that's faster than any other technology that's ever been released. And that's what causes a lot of the hype and the fear, right? High speed, and it does some things, not all things, some things better than humans. Okay. So then we're going into it's helpful. I'm mainly going to chat about ChatGPT, but I need to say about, what are all the systems you've heard about and just kind of situate them. So, because there's a lot of words that get thrown about in the news, and it's helpful if you know, well, what are we actually talking about? Okay. So we have and again, everything going forward here is primarily focused on generative AI, which is, these are all systems that work with language that you can go and you open it up and you don't have to know a computer programming language like Python. You can use English words. They work in other languages, but currently English language is the one that works the best. Okay. So we have although there's many companies, these are the dominant companies, okay, that are out there and known to be, offering AI, okay? And when the public sphere, what we see is their AI chatbots, okay? And then you have the large language model that those chatbots are running on, okay? So the one that got released first is OpenAI, right? Released ChatGPT, and when they released it, like it was running on GPT-1, then 2, then they released it at 3, then they went to 3.5. If you use the free version of ChatGPT, it's 3.5. If you pay $20 US now a month, you get access to GPT-4. Right? So it's just helpful to know, who owns it, what is it that they put out there as a public, and what is it running on? Okay. Up until and last year, Google released one called Bard, and it's not even on here now because they upgraded that, and they a few weeks ago they released Gemini, and yesterday morning, I think it was yesterday, anyway, this week they released Gemini 1.5. So it's interesting, like this is changing very quickly. Okay. And although my research I've been researching all the systems I can. Gemini, um, I've played with it a little bit, but I'm not, it's too new for me to give a solid analysis on through my presentation. So I'm just gonna, put it like some frameworks on what I can do and can't do here. Um, and I'll come back to that. Microsoft, now where Microsoft funded OpenAI, okay, and they have rights to the ChatGPT. They originally put it into their Bing chat, and now it's a part of Microsoft Copilot. Okay. So like in my workplace, we have our own version of Microsoft Copilot running. That just got I got early access to it a month ago, and it just got released to the whole organization today. Then Meta, which is, they're the folks, Facebook, Instagram, etc. Meta has gone a different route, which is really interesting. They are working on an open source. So open source means they're not going to own the code. They're housing it, and their programmers, developers around the world can work on the Llama 2 system. Okay. And you can, if you want, you can access that through you can go, it's called huggingface.com, and they have a Hugging Face channel. You can go in there and play with that for free. And then there's also Anthropic, which is mainly used in Britain and the EU. They've got, Claude, and Claude 2 is what it's running on. So there's all these different systems. A lot of them, like Perplexity, U.com, Jasper, ChatSonic, they're primarily running on ChatGPT. So they have contracts with OpenAI to use their systems. Some of them, what they're doing is they have contracts with multiple players. So they will contract with Google, and they'll contract with OpenAI, and they'll access all those systems. Okay. So just helpful to note, they're running on top of these other systems. So that's a lot of information. I'm not going to talk about all of them anymore. I'm actually going to really focus in on OpenAI ChatGPT. And specifically, I'm going to talk a lot about how I'm using ChatGPT 4, right? When I get into my demo, it'll be based on that. The reason for that is really, for the past year, the best quality system out there is OpenAI's ChatGPT 4. Okay. And none of the other systems have come close to it. And when you get into the ability of it to generate useful information, it has been number one. That changed with the release of Google Gemini. What I'm reading in the analysis of peers across the world who have had a lot of time. Um, it's like, oh, you could give up your day job and just play with this stuff. Anyway, so far, Google's Gemini looks like it is either equally as good as OpenAI's ChatGPT or possibly better. Okay. So it's just helpful to note that, but anything I'm sharing with you today would certainly apply to Gemini from what I've been playing around with. Okay. But OpenAI is where I've had more time to focus on. That's just a bit of a backdrop to understand what are all these systems, and there's more to come. I want to give another backdrop piece, because this gets into it. We want to talk about the fears of artificial intelligence in general, and certainly generative AI specifically. And one of the fears is, what will be the impact on work? Okay. And I can't, what's the way I would put it? I can't go, we could spend days talking about the role of technology and work. And so it's obviously beyond the scope of what we're going to do here today. But I want to mention this one to you. So there's a website out of the United Kingdom, and I highly recommend it. It's called 80,000hours.org. It's a philanthropically funded, all right? So it's charitably funded website. And it's really, the best way to think about it is, it's career information for geeks. Anyone who's really into like high level complex systems and wants to make the world a better place. Right. So 80,000 hours, they're really dedicated to helping people make the world a better place. And they get into things like, well, what's the best way to use your time career wise if you want to make the world a better place? Okay. So that's what they're about. They run a podcast and their podcasts are really long. I like listening to 20 and 30-minute podcasts. Their podcasts are typically 3 hours. So I download them onto my phone and I listen to them over multiple drives. But this is worth listening to. They're free downloads and it's really interesting. Michael Webb is a labor economist and he walks through the whole history of technology and its impact on work. And then he looks at how AI will likely impact work. Okay. And it's a really helpful, rational explanation of how things, how technology works. And so it's a really interesting one. Just a note, Esma, you're mentioning it's not suitable for high school students. No, 80,000 hours is meant for really not, it's university level and really graduate level, right? Like they're looking at, if let's say you're studying epidemiology or computer science, data analysis, things like that, they're looking at, how do you help people who are in those very those type of careers, map a path where they can make a difference. So it's really not a high school level. Okay, so helpful that you mentioned that, but I'm not suggesting you use it for your students. I'm suggesting we listen to it to help us understand the lay of the land. And kind of for me, it was helpful because it calmed me down, right? And it was like, yeah, here's a really good perspective of history. And one of the things that Michael Webb gets into with generative AI is the professions that it primarily impacts are the professions that are highly regulated and professionalized and have a lot of education. So lawyers, doctors, social workers, educators. And so these are actually professions or trades where they have actually a lot of control over what they do and what comes in and how that is all managed. So, it's a really interesting listen, and I highly recommend that. And so that I won't get lost on that whole debate today on it, but I think it's useful. And then from there, you can go on and do more research. But I think now it becomes something we all need to be aware of as, as career professionals, what are the labor market implications of AI? We need to pay attention to that. Want to get into addressing some of the a couple of ethical issues, just to make sure that we're paying attention to these things because I don't think they get addressed enough. Okay, so some of the things that I've looked at. Yeah, have a look at this. I'm sure you have, when you've gone to log into some website, you may have had to go through something like this, which is called a CAPTCHA. Okay. And it shows something around traffic, and you have to click on it. And then if you click on it apparently correctly, it lets you into the site. So it's very interesting because CAPTCHA was an independent company and then Google bought them. And what's interesting is that Google realized an interesting piece about what they could do with this, which is it's a way of providing security for websites, but that's not the only thing it does. Okay. What happens is that Google's really struggling with teaching cars, the software they use in cars, on how to identify things on roads. Okay. It's very complicated. So if you look at this image, it's fascinating because right away you see there's the two rows on the bottom. The second row from the bottom, those are obviously traffic lights. And Google knows that, and Google's AI systems know that. Okay. But the lights on the bottom right, what are those? Are those traffic lights? So they don't like their systems, their data doesn't know. So what they need is tens of thousands of humans to look at it and say, is that a light? Yes or no. So what happens is when you go into a website and in order to log in, you get something like this. It's not just checking out if you're a human, you're training their artificial intelligence for free on your time. And we don't realize that a lot of times when we interact with the internet, we ourselves are training systems, right? Like, so our data flows to them and helps them develop their systems, right? So anytime you interact with any artificial intelligence, you're not only, you're not just the accessing a system, you may, without realizing it, be sending your information and data to that system. So one of the things we need to be aware of when we're using systems is whose data is going where. Okay, it's a big deal, right? Because right now, if you don't think, if you don't go in and check in different systems, anything you put in, okay, into a system, okay, can end up being in that large system and can be accessed by others in that same system. Okay. There are exceptions to that. So one of the reasons, like I work for a community college, one of the reasons they're using Microsoft's Copilot is because the commitment from Microsoft is that the computer servers sit in the country where your school is. Okay, so not in a different country. That's the first thing. And then the other piece is that they guarantee that the data that you enter into their system stays within your institution and it doesn't go out into anywhere else on the internet, right? So that's an interesting piece to be aware of, is that when you're working with any system, you really need to understand the ethics of where's your data? Do you own it? Does it sit only within your systems, or does that data flow out of there? I'm assuming, that in your professional ethics pieces, there are components where you have to really pay attention to that. So you have to be really careful about for if you're with clients or students, where's that data going? Question from, is there anything else other than the responses? Not that I'm aware of. It's really just used to visual training for their AI. But the thing here is not to be aware of. It's just, it's a good example that when we interact with AI systems, they can, our information goes to them. So whatever system you choose to use, you need to be aware of it, right? Like how often do you think, you go and you download an application onto your computer or your smartphone or tablet? How often do you read the agreement, right? And how often do you understand what they do with your data, right? That's the main thing here. So from an ethical standpoint, professional use, we need to make sure we understand those things. So that's, these are kind of things to be aware of as, before we go in and play with the great tools. The other piece to be aware of is this thing called hallucinations. I am sure some of you have heard about this. So the idea is that, and I don't know why they ever dreamed up the word hallucinations for artificial intelligence, but it's the one that stuck. So what it is that sometimes you ask whatever AI system you're in, you ask it something and it gives an answer, and it might even give you references, and everything or some things that it shares may not be accurate, and some of the references may not even exist. Okay, so this is a really helpful piece to be aware of, because one of the things I've learned with working with generative AI is that I have to have high level expertise, okay, in my profession. I have to have a really strong knowledge of the language so that I can sift between what is accurate and what is hallucination. Okay, so as you'll see when we get going forward here, and I show you an example of a process I use, what's interesting, it's very fast, it's very efficient. I save typically, if I'm going to, let's say, spend 12, 15 hours with a client, and that I could cut that time in half, okay, by my use of AI. Right. But then I have to understand what I'm working with to make sure that the data is really accurate. Okay. As the AIs get better training, there's less hallucinations. But my understanding from the experts I talk to in the field is that there's always the risk of error. So we want to be aware of that, right? There's always a risk, and so you can't just trust everything you get. This is a great little chart to say, when ethical use, safe to use generative AI. It's a Creative Commons license. It's a great thing to print and have up like on your office wall or wherever you are, because it gets into what do you, should you use it or not, right? And the key thing is, does it matter? The starting point is, does it matter if the outputs you get are true? Well, obviously in our work, it's a yes. So then we need to, do you have the knowledge and expertise to ensure that the output is actually accurate, right? Assuming that's a yes for all of us, then are you willing to take full responsibility, which includes a legal responsibility, right? If there's inaccuracies, right? And if that's a yes, then great, go ahead and play with it and use it in your client or student work, right? But you'll notice that there is a burden of proof where we need to be clear around, oh, I'm not just gonna, I'm not gonna just throw stuff in there and then hand it out. I'm going to be reviewing it and checking for accuracy, because you don't want to be distributing work with hallucinations in it to your students or clients. Right. So that's kind of a helpful ethical framework to be aware of, where I want to make sure that what I do is meeting a certain a professional standard. And then when that's all in place, now we get to go play. Okay. So when I'm working with a student or a client, I'm really clear what I use. Okay. And I've been doing that for a long time. I use Grammarly artificial intelligence for, grammar, spelling, stuff like that. And I've always used it, well, not all, well, for years now, I've used it to help like clients do cover letters. So when I start working with an individual, I would say, oh, by the way, I'm using Grammarly and I want to check in and make sure you're aware. Here's the things I use. Like, and I itemized the software I use and a little bit about it so they understand. And I want to make sure that I have their permission to, like, oh, this is what I'm going to use and this is how I work. Are you okay with that? Right? So they have the right to refuse. Okay. I've never actually had an issue, but I always make sure that they understand, right, what that's about. So that's just a little bit there. Okay. So we've gone through all the background now. I've talked about a little bit of the history, the AI models, right? Ethics and use. Okay. So we're going to go do a deep dive into the type of practice that I do. Okay. Oh, good. So folks familiar with Carrie's work. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of stories. The technical term professionally we say is, we do narrative analysis, right? But it's storytelling. And I have used this for, I've been doing this work for a long time, many decades. And I actually, at one point when I was struggling with understanding how to work, I mean, Richard Bowles is a person I've listened to him speak, but, at one point when I was really struggling, there was a phone, he's, just in case not everyone's aware, he has passed away. But at one point, years ago in my career, and I was struggling, there's a phone number in the book, and I actually called it and he answered the phone. It was amazing. And so we had this lovely conversation and he was really helpful. And what I got into, I really wanted to understand why he went with the stories. And his source for the stories and what was Bernard Haldane. Richard Bowles started out doing work with laid off religion ministers in the United States, and he was contracted with to go around and spend 2 years building up capabilities to help folks make career transitions. And he checked out all the best of the best. And so he had a real solid knowledge on what would work. And one of the people he really felt who understood things was Bernard Haldane. And he took Haldane's work and he built on that. And what you'll see is a lot of the career literature that's released to the public uses some form of storytelling. And so a more contemporary Canadian is Carrie Twigg, so she does some really neat stuff as well. I'm not wed to any particular storytelling model. I just want to acknowledge that this has been out there and it's a great approach, and I highly recommend it. And it's the model that I use, and it used to be a very labor intensive time, right? Very time consuming, because I have my clients prepare stories. I have them come in and share their stories with them. I listen to their stories, and as I'm listening, I identify all their skills and their values and beliefs and transition capabilities. Like, the stories give me everything I need to know about them to then help them make effective career transitions. right? So that is the backbone of my work. And I have found this to be more helpful. I'm trained and certified in all sorts of different formal quantitative assessments. So no, I'm sure there's some fans out there of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, true colors, personality dimensions, DISC, and on and on and on, right? Strong interest in inventory, etc. And I find that none of those compare in helping people as well as the storytelling approach. Okay, and I've done lots of work in this, so it's just kind of where my biases land here. Okay, so what help, but it's really time consuming. Okay, so what I have done is then, in the old days on the left, people would write by hand out their stories, right? And then sometimes people would type them up. Now, what's amazing is that with the technology, like often what I just say to my clients, I say, just go tell the story into your phone or your tablet. Okay. And of course, what's on like, okay, I'm an Android user, so I have a Google Pixel, but I have multiple apps on my phone that I can just speak to it and it turns my voice into written text. And the accuracy is currently around 99%. Right. So it makes it really easy. So students and clients, I have them go do that. Okay. So it's a really interesting here's what I'm doing now with them. I give them homework and I get them to tell stories on their smartphone using text to speech AI. So that's not generative AI, that's just text to speech AI. Okay. Which is, as you know, it's a very accurate process and it's simple. It used to be very hard to get students to write or clients to write or type out their stories and then bring them in and tell me the stories and that. So what I do is I get down, they do this now. They send me the text and I have my AI prompts prepared and I feed the story into AI and I facilitate the prompts and then I review it with the client. Okay, and this cuts out hours and hours and hours of work. So this may not make sense yet, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example so you get a sense of how it works. Okay, because I have a series, what I've been doing is playing with the prompts. So for those who are new to AI, when you're working with artificial intelligence, you're going to you need to learn how to write effective prompts. Prompts are the direct, like, it's like the code that you give to the computer, right? It's a computer code. It's written in English, but it's still a code. And the code tells the AI what to do. Okay. So so I call it just writing effective prompts. Officially in the AI world, we call this prompt engineering. Okay, so and you can go and there are lots of blogs and websites and webinars out there on prompt engineering. Okay, because understanding how to do that is the secret to using AI effectively. Okay, so what I have done is I've developed a set of prompts to help me work with the storytelling approach. So the first is that you give your chatbot a job or identity, which means, is it an employment counselor, a career counselor? Is it a recruiter? Okay, so first thing is I give it an identity. Then I give it a verb, like I'm telling it what to do. I'm very direct and I'm specific about what I want it to do. And then I have a conversation with it. Okay, it's a back and forth. Okay, and for those of you who've done this, it's kind of like sometimes it's a bit eerie. It's like, oh, it feels like you're not talking to a person, but it can feel like you're talking to a person because the level of the language is so sophisticated. So Um, my prompts change over time and I tweak them, but here's an example of how I'm going to take a client's stories, right? And I'll have them in a text file, and I'll say, act as an employment coach, analyze these stories and list all the skills, and then I'll put in the text of the stories. And I send that off. Then it gives me a response. And then and it gives me a list of all the skills, which could be 20, 50, 100, 150, depending on how much stories I get. Then I say, okay, act as an employment coach, organize these skills into categories. And I can say 3 categories or whatever, and it'll do like it does what you ask. Then I can say, here's one. How many of you have worked so hard to get your clients or students to write situation, action, results, or STAR model approaches. So AI knows what all those models are, right? Already. So I've said, act as a recruiter, rewrite the stories based on the situation, action, results model, right? And 1 minute later, they're rewritten. This is amazing for my clients because it takes their words and rewrites their words in a way to help them learn. I also then say, now I'm giving the AI a different role. I'm saying act as a copywriter, rewrite each story into an accomplishment statement, write each one into 2 sentences. Okay, so I'm getting very specific. So here I am going through and I'm generating personal branding statements, and then I'll go and identify jobs in demand. Okay, so that's what we're working with here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put into the chat. Okay, so a little bit of a disclaimer on this. I'm going to put this into the chat, and it's a link to, okay, so you can share your chat. This is not some person's actual one. And what I did is I created a composite file to use for training. Okay, so now you actually have to have a login to ChatGPT in order to access this. But if you already have a login, you put that in your browser and you'll be able to see all my prompts. Okay, I'm going to pull up mine, I hope, here in a sec. I just got to clear a few windows. I have a lot of windows open right now. And I'm going to put mine on the screen. And then we'll just kind of chat about that, what it looks like. Okay, here we are. Okay, so this is, I'm in Google Chrome, and I'm using ChatGPT 4. And so for those of you who opened up the link, you can just look at that, but this is actually the original raw piece. So in this one, you'll see my prompts where I said, act as a career coach. The user will provide you with text and triple quotes, analyze the text and identify the skills. So I've changed my prompts over time. And I'm looking at refinements and that. So then I just literally dump the quotes, the stories in, okay? And then it comes back and it says, based on the stories, here are the skills. All right, so it gave me the skills for each story, and this is in seconds. Okay, like this is something that takes me an hour to an hour and a half to do well if a person comes with a lot of stories, right? And then I go through and I check them, but my experience so far is that this is very accurate because large language models understand words really well. So it's like, this is, for me, it's a dream come true to have this ability. Then I say, act as a career coach, rewrite these skills into 3 groups. And then I get project management and strategic implementation, IT service management and process optimization, technological proficiency and training leadership. I go, oh, these are nice. Then it has all the bullet points for each ones, right? So it's like, this is amazing because this is hours and hours of my work done in minutes. Then I say, okay, here we are, act as a recruiter using the SAR model, write a story for each of the 3 skill categories. So what's happening here? It's taking the stories above and rewriting them into the SAR model, right? So now I can teach my client how they're going to present themselves in the interview. Because I used to do this all, like hours of training one-on-one or in groups, but it's a lot of work to train the person. Okay, now you need to rewrite your story in the SAR model. Okay. And it takes time and it's hard. Now it's their story, but it's rewritten. Okay. Again, we're only minutes in here. Oh, some people like that. Great. Thanks for the hands thing. That's great. Okay. So this one, to me, this is just transform. And it's so helpful because the most painful, arduous parts of the process I used to work on with my clients, they're now like, it's easy. Okay. Now here's the fun part. If it really gets fun here because when you say act as a copywriter, right? Like I've known folks who are copywriters and they take basic words and they make them sound fancy. All right. And so you say to the AI, act as a copywriter, rewrite each story into accomplishment statements, write each one in 2 sentences. So here it is. right? So you look at this project manager led the transformation of project management practices and so on. Like, and you could tell, no, I just want one sentence. You just tell it what you want. Okay. So what I like about this and the benefit of it, I call it inside out. It's authentic to the client because it's their story. Okay. So it's coming from them, but then we're helping them take their experience and their stories and bring it to the market. Okay. And that's why I find it's really quite amazing to work with. Another hard thing is getting people to come up with branding statements, right? So here's an interesting one where I say, act as a copywriter, write a personal branding statement using these skill clusters, write a maximum of 200 words. And here's where you get specific at a grade 10 reading level, right? Because you don't want it too fancy, right? So most people don't, by the way, read above grade 10. And so, so anyway, so it gives a person that thing. And then you can say, okay, write a career profile summary. And then you've got that, right? And I've actually done this with where you can say to folks, oh, you know, here, write this for a LinkedIn. And it knows how to write for LinkedIn. It's a little weird, right? Like, because when it gives you LinkedIn stuff, it gives you it exactly in the way LinkedIn wants it. So it's like, okay, this is amazing. Um, Really helpful. And then the other piece is one of the issues or downfalls of narrative or storytelling approaches is that it didn't connect to the world of work or the labor market, right? Like, so one of the things folks say about like interest assessments or aptitude assessments is they say, well, they give you concrete connection to the labor market. Now with stories, you get a direct concrete connection. Like this is amazing because when you're using ChatGPT 4, and this is true of like Google Gemini does this, but there's plugins, okay? And the plugins go like you can put plugins that run it onto the internet and do specific types of work, right? So I had a plugins running on this so that it's not just running in the AI, but it's going out to the internet and comparing the skills that my client has to opportunities in companies. Okay. And so then it's giving me a list of potential, it gives me 7 potential roles this person can do. Okay. So that's where it's taken this. Right. And then, at the end, I go, thank you very much for your help. And then we have this, this friendly back and forth. Okay. So that's the link I've sent out. That'll work if you have a ChatGPT login. You can go look at that and you can analyze this more and take the time to really like, oh, what did he tell it to do? How did that response work? So that's kind of, neat to play with. Okay. And I'm gonna
Rob,
yeah,
sorry to cut in. I just thought just before you move off this
yes,
example, which everyone's loving, there are a couple of questions, and it probably goes back to your initial, broad thinking about ethics. So there's a couple of questions. One was talking about
yes.
de-identify everything first before you put it in, and then there was
Uh,
another question
yeah,
which speaks about the privacy factor of loading a client's story into
yes,
generative AI. Did you want to just
yeah,
touch on those two quickly? I wasn't
yes.
sure how much. Yeah, cool.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Because I'd like to speak to that and I gotta make, I have like too much information. So thank you. So there's a couple of ways that you handle this, or I handle it, okay? And you have some choices here. So the first is, you need to have a conversation with your client, okay, around how much information they want to share and don't want to share, and you want to be really clear what the consequences are, okay? So the one thing you can do when you're working in the paid systems is you can tell it, okay, like you go down into there's settings, and in the settings you say, do not use my information for training. Okay, so in ChatGPT 4, and they most of them have a setting this way, but you have to do some digging to find it. So it's really in ChatGPT 4, the paid version, you can say, do not use my stuff for training, which means and like so it's what'll happen is that and it won't save your information. Okay. So that experience, like when you run it, you need to make sure you pull it off right then and there. Okay, because once you log out, it'll be gone. Right. So that's ideal because then no information is getting shared onto the open internet. No information is getting shared in the AI systems. Okay. So that's the best way to handle it from that standpoint. The other way is where you're using an institutional version of Microsoft Copilot. So if you are in an institution and you have, and it's so I don't know where it varies country to country, but in Canada right now, Microsoft has released Copilot to educational institutions as what happens is that the institutions have a contract and they have Office 365 and Teams, and part of that now just happens to include Microsoft Copilot. Right. So the way Copilot works in our institution is that there's a legal agreement with Microsoft that no information can flow outside of the institution. Right. So there's two ways you protect identity that way, which is, do you just turn off the training piece or you make sure you're using a particular model that doesn't share back, it's not training them. So those are the two ones. The other thing is that I always make sure that no matter what, I make sure there's no employer identification, there's no names, there's no addresses, there's no dates. I know I've always kind of been that way. I'm a little bit paranoid, so I've always, clean data that way. So that's the important stuff. And does that answer that enough to get a sense of
No, I think that's good, Rob. Thanks.
okay, great. Um, so there was some questions that are helpful about okay, terms of quality, questions that are really important. Is there a difference between chat 3.5 and 4? Yes. 3.5 doesn't do nearly as much as 4. Like you really need to be using the paid version 4. And from what I've heard from my peers, it's the same with Google Gemini. It's not the free version, it's the paid version, right? So just helpful to be aware of that. When I'm working in it, I'm not using any of the free versions, and it's also harder to control the settings that give you the confidentiality if you're in a free version. Like you really need to be in the paid versions to get that turn off the sharing, right? So, I just, folks are wondering how I get folks started around the homework, and that's when I first meet with anyone, I get them to naturally tell me a story. Well, tell me about that work you did in that place, or, oh, that's neat. You loved that class at school, and you said that project was really well. Tell me about it. So all of my students and clients, and I mean all of them, tell me typically two stories in my first meeting. And then I always make a note and I jot down the skills I hear. And then I reflect back to them. Oh, the skills I heard you share in this are this, this, and this. And they go, oh, wow, that's amazing. So every client or student who leaves a meeting with me leaves with new information about themselves at the end of the first session. And then that's the hook. Because then I say, would you like to do some more work and learn more about that? And would you like to learn how to link that to a career transition or a new job or whatever it is they're looking for, right? Depends on their goals, or is it about, what program you want to study at university? So what I'm doing there is I'm trying to create an incentive and motivation for them to do some homework. Then I say, how you told me that story? I'd like you to tell me some more. And I say, pull out your phone. And then I figure, what apps do you have on the phone? Okay. And then I say, okay, can you just over the next week, as you think of it, tell a few stories, right? Then send them to me. So that's how I'm setting it up. Real simple, low barrier to entry. I'm not making a big deal out of it. And I'd say, just as you've told me stories today, we're gonna take these stories and then I'm gonna show you how we can use them to help you know about your skills and what opportunities are available for you. And it'll help us with writing resumes too, right? So just, I'm using it to decrease the friction. Okay. Um, okay. Yeah, so how you use stories, there's a good question around, depending on how you work and where you work, your organization really needs to have really clear, like, how do you contract with people, right? That's really important, right? So, You've really got to have that clearly written down. The simplest thing I can think of is that you have on your client intake sheet, you're going to have a checklist of the types of technology you use, and then they're going to check yes or no to the use of each one, right? And then you're both going to sign off. You're going to have some kind of form like that in an agency setting for sure. Um, Kirsten, you're wondering about, does the client lose their authentic voice? You see, what I think this helps them to preserve it because, excuse me, what I see happening too often is that people go out and look at stuff on the web and then they try and write to the words they see on the web. And so what I'm trying to do is get them to stick to it's their story. Like they're still telling their story, but they're putting it into a structure that makes it a little bit easier for interviewers, human resource professionals to understand. Okay, hopefully there's been a couple of questions that I think I've got at. Okay.
There's another
Okay.
interesting question, Rob. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you've now moved into Q&A or if you've got anything you need to finish up on,
Yeah,
because I'm
I'm
just
I'm
conscious.
open to let's just chat.
Yeah, cool. So Sue's asked how many of the chat services rely on data from websites versus social media posts versus their own learning.
Oh, so large learning models are trained on everything on the internet. Like anything that's out there that you can go get, they've churned that information. And then what happens is that you have humans who go and look at interact with it and they're involved in that training as well. Right? So it's the full web. And also like there's a lot of documents, like one of the interesting, now this is where it gets controversial and there's actually lawsuits going on in the United States right now because most books that have been written that were translated into put on the web in some way, shape or form somewhere, those AI systems have been trained on them. So if you want to get summaries of a Stephen King novel, you can, that's a question of copyright, which I can't get into, but it's helped just understand how much AI training has happened about on the full internet.
And Rob, have you got a view about, what's the future of people whose professional services are resume writing?
Oh,
So they sit down with.
well, oh yeah, well, it's an interesting thing. I don't know where resume writing is going to go, period, because if resumes become something that are so easy to conjure up, I'm not sure they're like I've been questioning, are resumes going to stick around or is it going to be just LinkedIn? Right. And so, like, because resumes are hard to verify now. And so I'm thinking it's more like LinkedIn or things like LinkedIn and our networks that give us social validation is really important. So I'm not, it's an unknown where it'll all go, but the key thing is if anyone can use AI to write a really great resume, then that probably waters down the role of the resume.
Mm.
Right. Like, so I mean, I've had colleagues for years saying, when do you think the resume is going to become extinct? So I think AI is going to be the thing that does that ultimately. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting piece. And Laura, it's a good thing you made as a career change out of copywriting, but it's certainly helpful for career development. It's a great skill. Okay.
And probably just one more question because I'm conscious of the time,
Yeah.
Rob. Um,
Yeah. So.
Karen was asking about references to the consequences of putting data into AI. So not about sharing it with clients, but more for us as professionals. Did you have anywhere you would recommend?
Okay, so the consequence, yeah, I don't references at my fingertips. No, I'm thinking of do you have a way of distributing stuff to folks after the
Yeah,
fact?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's some places, there's some things I follow, and one
Okay.
of the things you want to do is you want to start like following certain people, right? So there are some folks I follow and where I pay attention to it, and what they're saying, because that's, I'm kind of learning from them and trying to like look at, okay, what does that mean for my work in career development? as opposed to me, I can't possibly be an overall AI security person. So I'm looking at what does this
Mm.
mean for our specific area and go from there. Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Okay. So we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, definitely. Conscious of people's time, so I might just wrap it up here. I mean, like it's been really interesting today. I think last week, as I said to you, last week we had JP who was, very,
Yeah.
excited in the demonstration. I think today, though, I think what you've added to the series is that level which was required about the ethical considerations of
Oh,
using
right. Right.
AI, which has been fantastic. I think your prompting really backed up what JP was talking about last week. So he was saying,
Okay.
if you want the best out of these services, you've got to learn your prompts, right? So I think
Yes.
that's a big takeout for people that work in our industry is it's not just about going to these services and just going, splurting it all out. It's really the art of perfecting your prompt questions. And I think you made a really good analogy where you're sort of saying it feels like you're talking to a person, but you're not talking to a person.
Yeah.
But really, you've got to put yourself in that mindset. Ask, enter into the discussion with it before you actually kick off. So, it's been great.
Appreciate that. I think that's key. The takeaway is like, yeah, understand your ethics and then learn how to do the prompt engineering and invest in that, and that'll pay off. Like you'll love it.
Yeah.
It makes the difference.
It was a really valuable hour. It went super, super quick. And I think, as you said, you've got so much information, so it was very hard to condense into an hour. So I do appreciate that.
Okay.
We might reconnect later in the year and sort of
Okay.
see where
How
we've
it's all
progressed.
changed.
How
Right.
it's definitely all changed, what we're dealing with then. So thank
All
you for
right.
giving up your
Thank
time in
you.
the evening. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. As I said, we've got one final webinar next week. If you are interested, just go to the Seeker website and you can register for that. If not, if you're in Australia, enjoy your work day, wherever you are joining us around the world. As I think, Rob, you had some colleagues, Canadian colleagues. I did see someone was joining us from Chicago as well, so in the US. So for those people that have stayed up to watch Rob, thank you for joining us as well. Have a great day, everyone, and bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.